Hello everybody. Thank you for coming today. So my name's Eric Price. I'm the owner of Japanime Games, and as you may know, a lot of the games that we make we bring from Japan. We work with a lot of Japanese game designers, and I go to Japan once a year to go meet with game designers and find new games and bring them back to the States and around the world. So these are two of my employees that live in Tokyo. That's Maisie and Ken. And I had them go to Game Market this year to do some interviews with Japanese game designers and talk to people about just what it's like being a game designer in Japan, the whole game design business over there. And Game Market itself is done 3 times a year, twice in Tokyo, once in Osaka. And I always go at least once a year, sometimes twice. Just to have business meetings with people I already work with or find new people. This is one of the companies that we do a lot of work with, Delightworks, and they're working on a Fate Grand Order game, which I'll tell you more about later, because I've got some video clips right here that I'm going to show you. This is of Ken and Maisie as they show up. So I'm not seeing any audio here or hearing any audio, but obviously we've got subtitles. Huh. Um, oh, okay. Well, I guess we're just gonna read it. Honestly, I mean, I could play some music on my phone here. What do you guys like? Let's make it not so quiet. Let's see. Oh, Alt J is good. Little background music. Yes.
So is Delightworks a game design team, or is it like more of a software development company? Because I know Delightworks for developing Fate Grand Order,
Yeah.
which is a video game, not a board game. So
Correct.
are they more into software development?
Yes. They are a software company, and they put out Fake Grand Order, which I'm sure you guys know quite a bit about. And now they're working on board games as well. In fact, that's their booth right there, the Delightworks booth. Maisie's from the UK, and she's been working for me. She lives in Tokyo now, but she's been working for me for the last year, doing translations and layouts, rule books, things like that. And Ken's kind of our technical guy that deals with contracts and things of that nature. But an interesting thing about Game Market is it's mainly hobbyists, like this very funny lady here. Um, They're a bunch of small companies that are making these games where they might only make 200 copies of a game. It's half gammon, half backgammon with penguins. And it's really cool, all the creative hobbyists that are creating these games just to sell at Game Market. And they'll do this 2 or 3 times a year. They'll show up and have a booth with the intent of just selling through their print run. And it's interesting to see just all the creative stuff coming out. There'll be a few companies that are larger that are doing larger print runs, like ArcLight. And ArcLight's doing some new games, but most of what they do now is bringing other games into Japan. So there's only a few. There's like five, six companies that will have a large stand, like something about the size of our booth downstairs that you would see, and mostly it's all these people with just a table, like those. Um, it's been growing steadily though. Board games were fairly non-existent in Japan 10 years ago. Game market's been running for about 10 years now, and it's about 20,000 people at this point. Ken's backing me up on what I just said. And sometimes I find something that's just really a diamond in the rough, so to speak, where I'll find a designer that's created a game that they just thought was a fun hobby project to make, had really no plans on doing anything beyond that. And there's been several games where I was very impressed with, and I ended up bringing them back and translating them. And so accidentally run into some really cool stuff there. Delightworks just started going last year. This is a really cool tank game here. It's got dice in the tank. It's actually reminiscent of a one-piece pirate ship game that we're working on right now, where we've got dice that sit inside the pirate ship. I didn't steal that idea from him, though. This is a pretty neat game they also made that has a bunch of model pieces, and you can create your own mech and put it together during the game. And he's saying they hand make all of the pieces. One of our game designers that we do a lot of work with is named Kuro, and he was actually supposed to be here, but he had a traffic accident on the way to the airport. But he is interviewed in this at one point. We've got a clip with him. But Kuro creates a lot of different games, and I was talking to him about the games he designs, and he'll spend quite a bit of money on each game he makes because he's doing such a small print run, to where he's basically breaking even if he's lucky. And I was like, why don't you try to make a profit? And he said, it's my hobby. Why should I make money on my hobby? And that's just his attitude about it. It was kind of funny to me, but I turned my hobby into something I make money on. It's okay. But that's just the direction they're thinking about it. It's these very small indie developers. This guy has wooden standees. A lot of interesting little games with very unique components that people hand make. And weird clips jumping. I think in this part they were speaking English, but then they went back to Japanese.
So, compared to the video game market, the digital game market,
Mm-hmm.
how would you say the growth of the board game market is compared to the video?
Oh, well, board games are very hot. I really don't know what the growth of the video game market is because that's not my market, but I hear people like video games. I think it's a thing that people do, just not me. I'm a tabletop board gamer, card gamer, so but the board game industry is very strong right now, growing quite a lot. But the other issue that it has is that because of Kickstarter, it's made it so anybody can put together a game and publish it. And so there's just so many games coming out all the time. There's over 3,000 games that were published last year, tabletop board games and card games. And it makes it very difficult for anybody to get a game into distribution because distributors don't want to deal with a new company that just makes one game. This is a fun little card balancing game. They're plastic cards. It's like Tetris with a card house. And there's the Delightworks booth. Maisie's very happy because she just translated that game right there. That's a game that we're likely putting out early next year, I would guess. This game is, it kind of reminds me of a game called, oh, what was it? And how I'm drawing a blank. What's when you have different colors that have a number attached to them? No, 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 no. Pantone. Having Pantone numbers. So there's a game about Pantone that was called Pantone that came out earlier this year that was all about like more of design, but this is more about art. And so they've got you're doing things with actual paint here. It looks like. I mean, just very creative ideas. I haven't actually seen this myself. I've just seen it in the video because I wasn't at Game Market at this event. But it looks pretty interesting. I'll be going to Game Market in November. It's always interesting to see stuff that I've missed out on because there'll be 3 game markets a year, and if I'm only going to one a year, I might have missed some things. And pretty exciting thing we're working on is a game called Tokyo Sidekick that we just got the rights to that I found last November or December. Oh, no, it was November last year at Tokyo Game Market, and it had already released at the spring game market, and I hadn't even heard of it till I found it there because we don't always hear about things, these small indie games, but it's a really impressive game. I was very excited to see it and had a lot of fun playing it. So we'll be working on that soon. Maisie is going to be doing all the translations on that. I think that was the end of that general presentation. Well, here's a little clip specifically about Delightworks. This is the Fate Grand Order board game they're working on. We're working on it. It's a little complicated because Delightworks being the producer of the game, and they're just now releasing it in Japan, but they don't own the license themselves, and so we have multiple partners we have to get signed off on us doing it, but we intend to if we can get everything into place. When I was actually in Tokyo last year, I met with Nick, this guy they're talking with here, 4 times because we had 4 separate meetings because we kept getting together and talking about a lot of things. It was pretty interesting because Delightworks is a fairly large company with the largest mobile game or highest grossing mobile game of last year, Fate Grand Order. And when we were meeting, I was telling them all about producing board games. They didn't know anything about it. They'd never made a physical product before. And so I was helping them out with production and telling them how to get their costs down. They were spending something like $30 on producing this game. And I'm like, I can make this for you for like $7. And they're like, wow, that's amazing. So just working on production in Japan versus production in China, of course, is the main factor. But they just didn't have any experience with working on making the games themselves. And the other game that Maisie just translated that Delightworks made is called The Last Brave. But this is the layout of the Fate Grand Order board game. There's a lot to it. Every player has a character board and standees, which you might imagine me making in a little acrylic standees, like I like to do. But this was before the game had actually released when they were doing this interview, too. It's pretty much finalized at this point, but... And these... Oh, yeah, those are still cards from the same game. They also, through Aniplex USA, made the Fate Duel game, which I'm sure you guys saw at Anime Expo, with the giant miniatures. I'm also talking to Aniplex about helping them with that. Here's a little interview with Kuro. Basically, they were just talking about like his process, and Kuro makes so many games. He all by himself designs them, does all the graphic layout, and produces them. He might put out 8 games a year. It's kind of crazy because he likes it, as he says. He also has helped us out with getting artwork from some Japanese artists as well. But like I said earlier, he was supposed to be here as a guest, but did not make his flight because of an accident on the way to the airport. But he is okay. That's the good news. He still would like to come, but it was unfortunate it didn't work out. We actually have a new game from Kuro that's in my hotel room right now that we're discussing if we want to localize that. So there's a lot of projects we're always looking at. Generally, I'll bring home like a dozen new games from Japan every time I go. This is an interesting one too, the Xanadu game he's got. But we cannot make them all. We're looking forward to bringing you to an anime game convention in August this year. Yes. Are you excited to come? Yeah, he'd never been to the U.S. before, so. Yeah, I know. And then bad news on the way to the airport on top of that. Yeah. Interestingly, it was a couple years ago we had a guest coming to Anime Expo that a Japanese guest that ended up not coming. he was an artist for Naruto, I believe, and he ended up not coming because of recent shootings in the I think it was right after the Orlando shootings. Yeah, and then he was like afraid to come to L.A. afterwards. But I mean, honestly, I mean, I'm not going to get too political here, but it is kind of out of control. Um, but of course, in Japan, they don't have those issues, and so the idea of the crazy Wild West, where we we're not quite Syria here, but it feels that way to people in Japan. Anyway, I think there was a little bit. I kind of jumped over to the video here, but this was some slides that we had that probably were supposed to go in concordance with the actual videos, but that was The Last Brave right there is the card game that Maisie just translated that is about it's by Seiji Kanai, who is the designer for Love Letter and probably the most well-known Japanese game designer. So that's a cool one. He also designed our game Sword Art Online that came out last year. And then Dominate Grail War is the Fate Stay Night game. Tokyo Sidekick, I just mentioned, is a very cool game with 41 standees in it. It's the biggest game I've ever seen come out of Japan. It is this tall and this wide. It's really gigantic. I have a copy of that in my room too. But I was going to go over that with my team a bit more here at the show to figure out things that we might want to change about production on it and things like that. These are some of Kuro's games that we already published: Alismatic Heroes and The Terrifying Girl Disorder. It's the fun game with a funny name. But Kuro has a lot of really interesting game designs. I've really enjoyed working with him. And that's about it. Anybody have any questions? I just kind of zipped right through things because we don't have a huge crowd here, but maybe we do online. Maybe we will later. Maybe Randy can cut this part out.
Would you say there's a big difference in working with Japanese game designers versus American game designers, more than just necessarily the cultural change, but just expectations of publishing or contracts and things like that?
Sometimes yes, because they expect much higher royalties working with licensed characters in Japan. The whole retail chain is very different in Japan. A good example of that actually would be there's a Gundam game that I was offered that is released in Japanese. And of course, we'd love to make a Gundam game. I'm actually talking to Bandai directly about that, but this game had been created and it was offered up to me. And I was like, sure, yeah, we'd like to do that. And then they said that we'd have to pay 50% of retail. And I was like, well, I can't do that. There's the chain of retail and wholesale is different in America versus Japan. In Japan, the average retail shop is going to pay 70% of retail. So to them, it makes perfect sense to sell it at 50% to a publisher because they're going to end up selling it to the retailer at only 30% off. But that math does not work here where retailers expect to pay 50% off of retailer or retail pricing, and if I'm paying that myself, I make no money, and I'm not in it just for the hobby. I do need to make some profit, or at least I need to be able to pay my employees. So unfortunately, that didn't work out, but there are definitely other channels and directions to do things, and sometimes we're working with studios like Funimation to get the rights, and then they're working directly with the license holders in Japan, and that can be a lot easier. But game design-wise, it can be more work. Working with companies in Japan, or not companies, but game designers in Japan sometimes, but I do have my team in Japan that can help out with all of those questions, so that certainly makes it a lot easier.
How long does that usually take for you to start the process of trying to get a license of a particular franchise to the end of it?
It very much depends on the license holder, but on average, I would say 6 months, sometimes 2 years.
Well, we were interested in before we started making the game and we were obviously having fun and stuff.
Mhm.
We were looking to license it to a smaller Japanese style for like a digital game.
Mhm.
But we didn't really have always a communicate with Japanese companies.
Oh, right.
Do you guys have like a Japanese representative? Those revenues.
Ken normally deals directly with any kind of business contacts I'll have in Tokyo. He actually used to work for Bandai doing translations, and so he has been a valuable asset in that way. Has helped connect me up with certain people. Um, and I have a lot of friends over there that can connect us up with people, and I can have Ken go meet with them. All right, guys, thanks for coming. It's been great. I hope to be back next year. All right.